Clara, you're fired. The words echoed through the Le Bernardin restaurant like thunder on a sunny day. Clara Delacroix almost dropped the tray of crystal glasses she had been gracefully balancing in her hands for 3 years as the sommelier of São Paulo's most prestigious restaurant. What do you mean fired, Monsieur Laurent? Her voice trembled slightly, but her chin remained raised with the characteristic stubbornness of the Delacroix family. The French chef, with his waxed mustache and perpetually irritated air, waved dramatically with his pudgy hands. That food critic from Refined Palate magazine said our wine list was pedestrianly common after you recommended a Beaujolais to accompany the foie gras. It was a Beaujolais Village 2018, exceptional vintage that... Silence. Laurent slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses tinkle. You have 15 minutes to leave. And take that thing with you. Clara followed the chef's disdainful gaze to her corner table, where Napoleon, her gray Persian cat, dozed peacefully in a wicker basket. Yes, she brought her cat to work. Yes, this was against the rules. No, she didn't care. Very well. Clara tied her apron tighter as if it were armor. But first I need to serve table 17. Table 17 can... It's Mr. Maximilian Ashworth. The name dropped like a bomb. Laurent paled. Maximilian Ashworth. The man who appeared on the covers of Forbes and business magazines with the same frequency as he breathed. CEO of Ashworth Industries, an empire spanning from technology to wineries. 32 years old, confirmed bachelor, fortune estimated in billions, and an ego the size of Christ the Redeemer. He was also known for destroying reputations with a single Instagram review. Go. Laurent made a desperate gesture. But be diplomatic. Clara walked through the main dining room with the posture of a ballerina and the smile of someone who had just discovered they had superpowers. Table 17. There he was. Maximilian Ashworth was exactly like in magazine photos. Perfectly styled brown hair, sculpted jawline, suits that cost more than her rent for 6 months. But there was something different in person. Perhaps it was the way his fingers drummed impatiently on the table, or how his blue eyes seemed to always be searching for flaws in everything around him. He was on the phone, gesticulating irritably. I don't care if the Asian market closed down, Thompson. I want the reports on my desk by 6 or you'll be looking for a job tomorrow. And cancel my dinner with Vivienne Pemberton. I'd rather eat glass. Clara cleared her throat delicately. Good afternoon, Mr. Ashworth. I'm Clara Delacroix, your sommelier this evening. Maximilian raised his eyes, and for a millisecond something like surprise crossed his face. Clara had this effect on people. With her curly red hair that refused to behave, emerald green eyes and freckles that danced across her nose, she was the kind of beauty that made men forget their own names. But Maximilian quickly composed himself. I want something expensive. His voice was deep with an almost imperceptible accent that suggested education abroad. The most expensive you have. Certainly. Clara smiled, but something in her chest tightened. Men like him always wanted the most expensive, never the best. May I suggest our Chateau d'Yquem 1988? It's a true work of art with notes of... I'm not interested in the history. He returned to typing on his phone. Just bring it. Clara's smile wavered. 3 years studying enology, plus 2 working in French wineries, and this man treated her like a common waitress. Of course, Mr. Ashworth. She turned to fetch the bottle. And miss? His voice made her stop. Try not to drop anything. This suit costs more than your house. That was the last straw. Clara turned back slowly, her smile now dangerously sweet. You're absolutely right, sir. I'll be very careful. 5 minutes later, she returned with a bottle of Chateau d'Yquem, which cost approximately $10,000, and 2 Baccarat crystal glasses. Maximilian was still on the phone, gesticulating like a conductor leading a particularly cacophonous orchestra. Thompson, you're incompetent. How dare you question my decisions? I built this empire with... Clara opened the bottle with the perfection of an experienced sommelier. The soft sound of the cork being removed should have been music to any wine lover's ears, but Maximilian didn't even notice. She poured a small amount into the first glass, as protocol demanded, and offered it to Maximilian for tasting. He took the glass without even looking at her, sniffed quickly and took a sip, still talking on the phone. "It's fine." A dismissive gesture with his free hand. "You can pour." Clara took a deep breath. That wine was a 35-year-old masterpiece, created in the Sauternes region with grapes attacked by Botrytis cinerea fungus, which concentrated the natural sugars, creating a golden and complex nectar. This man had just treated one of the wine world's greatest treasures as if it were boxed wine. But professionalism above all. She began to serve the main glass. It was at that moment that Napoleon chose to wake up from his nap and, with the typical feline grace of his species, decided he needed to investigate the interesting smell coming from table 17. The cat jumped from his basket and walked majestically through the dining room, his gray tail swaying like a flag. Some customers smiled as he passed. Napoleon was a kind of unofficial restaurant mascot. "And another thing, Thompson, I want you to—" Napoleon gracefully rubbed against Maximilian's legs, purring. "What the hell?" Maximilian looked down, saw the cat, and in a brusque movement to get away, bumped into Clara. The rest happened in slow motion. Maximilian's elbow hit Clara's arm squarely at the exact moment she was pouring the wine. The glass flew from her hands, describing a graceful arc through the air. The Chateau d'Yquem 1988, $10,000 in liquid form, splashed directly onto Maximilian's white Italian shirt, trickling down the silk until it formed a golden puddle on the marble floor. The silence that followed was deafening. The entire restaurant stopped. Waiters froze with trays in the air. Customers suspended conversations mid-sentence. Even Napoleon stopped purring. Maximilian stared at his ruined shirt with an expression of growing horror. The golden stain spread across the fabric like ink on absorbent paper, completely destroying a piece that probably cost more than a compact car. "You—" He raised his eyes to Clara, and she could see the exact moment fury took hold of him. "You just threw wine on my shirt." "Technically," Clara said, her voice strangely calm, "you bumped into me when I was serving." "I bumped into you?" Maximilian stood up so abruptly that the chair almost toppled. "There was a cat attacking me." Napoleon wasn't attacking anyone, he just wanted to be petted. "Petted?" Maximilian's voice went up an octave. That creature destroyed my shirt." Clara looked at the stained shirt, then at Maximilian's red face, then at poor Napoleon, who had hidden behind one of the restaurant's columns. Something inside her definitely snapped. Maybe it was the fact that she had just been fired. Maybe it was years of having to smile at arrogant customers. Maybe it was the way he had treated that magnificent wine as if it were water. Or maybe it was simply the fact that nobody talked badly about her cat. "You know what, Mr. Ashworth?" Clara picked up the bottle, still half full of Chateau d'Yquem. "You're right, I did throw wine on your shirt. Finally you admit, and now I'm going to throw the rest." And without further ceremony, Clara turned the entire bottle over Maximilian Ashworth's head. The golden wine cascaded through his perfectly styled hair, ran down his shocked face, soaked his already stained shirt, and dripped to the floor in heavy, expensive drops. This time, the silence lasted exactly 10 seconds. Then the entire restaurant exploded. Some customers applauded. Others laughed nervously. The waiters seemed to be having small heart attacks. Monsieur Laurent simply fainted over a dessert table. Maximilian remained motionless, dripping $10,000 wine like a golden statue that was very well dressed and completely furious. "There." Clara placed the empty bottle on the table with a dry sound. "Now you have an interesting story to tell at your business dinners." She turned to leave, picked up Napoleon with the dignity of a queen, and walked toward the exit under the astonished gaze of everyone present. It was only when she reached the door that she heard Maximilian's voice, lower now, but still charged with an emotion she couldn't identify. "Hey!" Clara stopped but didn't turn around. "What's your full name?" For a moment she considered not answering. Then something mischievous sparkled in her eyes. "Clara Delacroix. And don't worry, Mr. Ashworth. I'm sure we'll never meet again." And she left, leaving behind a wine-soaked man, a fainted chef, a restaurant in uproar, and the strange feeling that her life had just changed forever. Outside, hugging her cat, Clara breathed in the São Paulo night air and smiled for the first time in a long while. "Well, Napoleon," she murmured, scratching behind the feline's ears. "It looks like we're unemployed, but at least we went out in style." If she had known what destiny was preparing, maybe she wouldn't have been smiling. But maybe she would have been smiling even more. "Miss Delacroix has what background?" Maximilian Ashworth sat in his glass-walled office on the 42nd floor of the Ashworth Tower, staring at the private investigator's report as if it were written in ancient hieroglyphics. 3 days had passed since the wine incident, as his assistant diplomatically called it, and he still couldn't get that infuriating redhead out of his head. "Extensive, sir." Detective Morrison adjusted his glasses nervously. Master's degree in viticulture from the University of Bordeaux, worked at Chateau Margaux and Domaine de la Romanée-Conti. She's brilliant, sir." Maximilian's jaw tightened. Brilliant people don't throw wine at their customers. "Actually, sir," Morrison consulted his notes, "according to witnesses, you bumped into her when—" "I don't pay you for commentary, Morrison." Maximilian's voice could have frozen champagne. "Just facts." The detective cleared his throat. "She's been unemployed since the incident. No restaurant in the city will hire her after what happened at Le Bernardin made the social media rounds." Something uncomfortable twisted in Maximilian's chest, but he ignored it. "Good. Actions have consequences." "There's more, sir." Morrison's voice dropped. "She's been caring for her grandmother, who has Alzheimer's. That's why she needs the cat. It's emotional support for the elderly lady. And she's behind on rent." Maximilian stood abruptly, turning to face the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking São Paulo. The city stretched endlessly below, a concrete jungle he had conquered piece by piece. So why did the image of Clara Delacroix, proud chin raised, green eyes blazing with defiance, keep haunting him? "Sir," Morrison ventured, "that's all. Send your invoice to accounting." After the detective left, Maximilian loosened his tie and poured himself 2 fingers of Macallan 25. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was drinking alone while thinking about the woman who had humiliated him with wine. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Darling, don't forget dinner tomorrow. The Pemberton girl will be there." Such lovely breeding. Maximilian grimaced. Vivienne Pemberton represented everything his mother wanted in a daughter-in-law: old money, impeccable manners, and the personality of expensive wallpaper. Their mothers had been orchestrating this match since they were teenagers. Meanwhile, across the city, in a tiny apartment in Villa Maddalena, Clara was having her own crisis. "Napoleon, we're in trouble." She scratched behind the Persian cat's ears as he purred in her lap. Around them, unpaid bills covered the coffee table like confetti from a very depressing party. Her grandmother, Elena, shuffled from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of tea, her silver hair perfectly arranged despite the early stages of memory loss. "Clara, dear, who was that handsome man you brought for dinner yesterday?" Clara's heart clenched. Yesterday, grandmother had asked the same question about a fictional man from a soap opera. "No one special, Vovo." Elena settled into her armchair, studying Clara with moments of clarity that still surprised them both. "You know, your grandfather threw soup at me when we first met." "He did?" This was a new story. Elena's eyes twinkled. "Tomato bisque, all over my yellow dress at the hospital charity gala. He was so mortified he bought me a new dress and took me dancing to apologize." She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about love, querida." Clara's phone rang, interrupting the moment. Unknown number. Clara Delacroix speaking. "Miss Delacroix, this is Margaret Ashworth." Clara nearly dropped the phone. Margaret Ashworth, socialite, philanthropist, and mother of the man she had drenched in wine. What could she possibly want? "I'd like to meet with you, today, if possible." "Mrs. Ashworth, if this is about what happened at Le Bernardin—" "Oh, my dear, it's precisely about that. 1 o'clock at Café Tortoni in Jardins. Don't worry, I don't bite." The line went dead, leaving Clara staring at her phone in bewilderment. 2 hours later, Clara sat in the elegant cafe, nervously smoothing her only good dress, a vintage emerald number that brought out her eyes. Napoleon waited in his carrier beside her chair, drawing curious glances from other patrons. Margaret Ashworth swept in like a force of nature. Tall, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. But her eyes held warmth that her son conspicuously lacked. "Miss Delacroix, how delightful!" Margaret settled across from Clara with practiced grace. "And this must be the famous Napoleon. Mrs. Ashworth, Please, call me Margaret, and before you apologize, let me tell you something." Margaret leaned forward conspiratorially. "My son has needed someone to throw wine at him for years." Clara blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Maximilian has become insufferably arrogant. Success went to his head like a bad vintage." Margaret signaled the waiter. "2 cappuccinos, please, and perhaps some salmon for the cat." "You want to feed my cat salmon?" "My dear, anyone who can reduce my son to speechless fury deserves the finest fish." Margaret's laugh was musical. "Do you know he spent 2 hours researching proper wine service protocols after your encounter?" 2 hours. The boy hasn't been curious about anything except profit margins in years. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I shouldn't have done it. It was unprofessional." "Nonsense. It was magnificent." Margaret stirred her cappuccino thoughtfully. "Tell me, what do you know about wine education?" The subject change gave Clara whiplash. I studied viticulture in France." "Why?" "I'm launching a charity foundation focused on culinary arts education for underprivileged youth. I need someone to develop the wine and hospitality curriculum." Margaret's smile turned calculating. Someone with impeccable credentials and the spine to stand up to difficult people. Clara's heart raced. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity. The salary is excellent, the work meaningful, and—" Margaret paused dramatically. "It would require working closely with my son. He oversees all foundation projects." "Mrs. Ashworth." Margaret, I threw $10,000 worth of wine on your son's head. I don't think he'd approve of hiring me." "Oh, my dear girl." Margaret's eyes sparkled with mischief. "That's exactly why I'm not telling him until after you start Monday." Clara nearly choked on her cappuccino. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious about what's best for my son, even when he's too stubborn to see it himself." Margaret reached across to pat Clara's hand. "Besides, you'd be working on the foundation's independent budget. Maximilian can bluster all he likes, but I write the checks." It was insane. Completely, utterly insane. Working for the mother of the man she had humiliated would be professional suicide. But Clara looked around the elegant cafe, thought of the unpaid bills on her coffee table, of grandmother Elena's medical expenses, of Napoleon's vet bills. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. What exactly would I be doing? Margaret's smile could have powered the city. Creating something beautiful, my dear. And perhaps teaching my son that there's more to life than profit and loss statements. As Clara listened to Margaret outline the position, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something far more complicated than a job. The universe, as her grandmother had said, seemed to have a sense of humor about love. She just hoped she'd survive the punchline. "When do I start?" "Monday, 9 sharp." "And Clara?" Margaret's voice turned serious. "Wear something wine-resistant. I have a feeling this is going to be an interesting project." Outside the cafe, as Clara walked home with Napoleon purring in his carrier, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Looking forward to working with you. Ms. Ashworth." Clara stopped dead on the sidewalk. How did he already know? Her phone buzzed again. Mother never could keep secrets. This should be educational. Clara stared at the messages, her heart hammering. She had the distinct feeling she'd just agreed to play with fire. But maybe, just maybe, she was ready to get burned. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a symphony orchestra falling downstairs. Clara stood outside the gleaming Ashworth Tower at 8:45 a.m., clutching Napoleon's carrier and wearing her most professional navy blazer, the one that, according to the sales clerk, made her look competent yet approachable. She felt neither competent nor approachable. She felt like she was about to walk into a lion's den wearing a meat suit. "This is insane, Napoleon," she whispered to the carrier. A disapproving meow emerged from within. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and glass, designed to make visitors feel appropriately insignificant. Clara approached the reception desk, where a perfectly coiffed blonde looked up with practiced politeness. "Clara Delacroix for Margaret Ashworth," she announced, proud that her voice didn't crack. The receptionist's eyebrows rose slightly. "The wine lady?" Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "Excuse me?" "Nothing, I mean—" The young woman fumbled with her computer. "Mrs. Ashworth is expecting you, 40th floor, and, She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Good luck." The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt longer than her college thesis defense. When the doors opened, Clara stepped into an elegant reception area where Margaret Ashworth waited, radiant in a cream Chanel suit. "Clara, darling." Perfect timing. Margaret's kiss on both cheeks was warmly maternal. "Ready for the grand tour?" "Mrs. Ashworth, Margaret, I have to ask, does your son really not know I'm starting today?" Margaret's smile was pure innocence. "Oh, he knows. He just doesn't know where you're working." Before Clara could process this ominous statement, Margaret was already leading her through mahogany-paneled hallways lined with contemporary art. "The foundation offices are on this floor, completely separate from Maximilian's corporate domain upstairs. You'll have your own space, your own budget, your own—" She stopped at a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Your own kingdom." Clara's breath caught. The office was beautiful, sophisticated without being cold, with built-in bookshelves, a sitting area, and enough space for Napoleon's carrier in a sunny corner. "Margaret, this is too much." "Nonsense. You'll need space to meet with potential students, review applications, host tasting sessions." Margaret gestured grandly. "Speaking of which, I've arranged for wine samples to be delivered this afternoon. Nothing too expensive. We learned our lesson about that." Clara couldn't help but smile. "You're never going to let me live that down, are you?" "My dear, that's the most entertaining thing that's happened in this building in years." Margaret checked her watch. "Now, I have a board meeting, but I've arranged for someone to show you around the foundation wing." As if summoned by magic, a tall man with kind eyes and graying temples appeared in the doorway. "Clara, I'm David Chen, Foundation Director. Welcome to Organized Chaos." Margaret departed with air kisses, leaving Clara with David, who turned out to be delightfully normal. As he showed her around the foundation offices, introducing her to the small but dedicated staff, Clara began to relax for the first time since entering the building. "The culinary program is Margaret's pet project," David explained as they toured a test kitchen. "She wants to give underprivileged kids real skills, real opportunities. Your job is to create a curriculum that teaches not just wine service, but hospitality, customer relations, the whole industry." "It sounds incredible." Clara meant it. This was meaningful work, the kind of project that could actually change lives. "It is. And Margaret's given you complete creative control, which is—" David paused delicately. "Unusual for this organization." "What do you mean?" "Well, typically everything has to be approved by—" "What the hell is she doing here?" The roar echoed through the foundation offices like thunder. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned toward the elevator bank where Maximilian Ashworth stood in the doorway, looking like a very expensive storm cloud. He was even more formidable than Clara remembered. The perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the commanding presence, those blue eyes that could probably freeze wine mid-pour. And right now, all that intensity was focused entirely on her. "Oh dear," David murmured. "He found out." Clara straightened her spine. She'd faced down snobbish wine critics and temperamental chefs. She could handle one overgrown businessman, even if he did look like he'd stepped off a magazine cover. "Good morning, Mr. Ashworth," she said coolly. "Lovely to see you again." Maximilian stalked across the office with predatory grace, stopping just close enough that Clara could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her traitorous pulse flutter. "You?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Have some nerve." "I have a job," Clara replied evenly. "Your mother hired me." "My mother?" Maximilian's jaw worked furiously. "This is my building." "Actually," David interjected nervously, "the foundation is independently operated under—" "David." Maximilian's tone could have wilted flowers. "Leave us." The foundation director fled with the survival instincts of a gazelle sensing a lion. The other staff members suddenly found urgent tasks elsewhere, leaving Clara and Maximilian alone in the middle of the open office. They stared at each other in electric silence. Clara was acutely aware of how he towered over her, how his presence seemed to fill the entire space. She was also aware that her pulse was doing very inappropriate things. "You think this is funny?" Maximilian's voice was soft, which somehow made it more dangerous. "I think I was offered a job, and I accepted it." Clara crossed her arms. "What's funny is that you're acting like a child throwing a tantrum." His eyes flashed. "A child? I'm trying to run a business empire and you're creating educational opportunities for disadvantaged youth," Clara finished. "How terrible of me." "You know what you are." "Employed." Maximilian stepped closer and Clara caught her breath. This close, she could see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes, the faint shadow of beard stubble, the way his mouth was set in a grim line that somehow made her want to. No, absolutely not. She was not attracted to this arrogant, impossible man. "Your trouble," he said quietly, "and you're in my office." They were standing so close now that Clara could feel the heat radiating from his body. The air between them crackled with tension that had nothing to do with wine and everything to do with the way Maximilian was looking at her mouth. "This isn't over," he said. "I certainly hope not." Clara's voice came out breathier than she intended. "It would be boring if you gave up this easily." Something shifted in Maximilian's expression. Surprise, maybe, or reluctant admiration. For a heartbeat, Clara thought he might actually smile. Then his phone rang, shattering the moment. "Ashworth." His voice was clipped, professional. "What? No, reschedule the Singapore call. I'll be right up." He ended the call and looked at Clara with an expression she couldn't read. "We're not finished, Miss Delacroix." "I'm counting on it, Mr. Ashworth." He turned and strode away, leaving Clara standing in the middle of the office with her heart racing and her cheeks flushed. Around her, the foundation staff slowly crept back to their desks, shooting her curious glances. Napoleon chose that moment to meow imperiously from his carrier. "You're right," Clara murmured, opening the carrier to let the Persian cat explore his new territory. "That was definitely interesting." David reappeared at her elbow, looking shell-shocked. "In 20 years of working here, I've never seen anyone talk to Maximilian Ashworth like that." "Like what?" "Like an equal." David studied her with new respect. "This is going to be a very interesting partnership." As Clara settled into her beautiful new office with Napoleon purring contentedly on the windowsill, she couldn't shake the memory of standing so close to Maximilian that she could count his eyelashes. The way he'd looked at her mouth, the electric charge that had passed between them. She was in so much trouble. But for the first time since the wine incident, Clara was beginning to think that trouble might be exactly what she needed. Clara's first week at the Ashworth Foundation passed in a whirlwind of curriculum planning and strategic avoidance of certain CEOs. She threw herself into the work with passionate intensity, designing a program that would teach hospitality skills alongside wine knowledge, real, practical education that could change lives. She was reviewing applications from potential students when her office door burst open without so much as a knock. "We need to talk." Maximilian stood in her doorway looking devastatingly handsome and absolutely furious. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly disheveled, and there was a dangerous glint in his blue eyes that made Clara's pulse do inadvisable things. "Ever heard of knocking?" Clara kept her voice steady, though her heart was hammering. "Ever heard of professional courtesy?" He strode into her office uninvited, Napoleon hissing softly from his perch by the window. You've been here 5 days and already caused 3 minor scandals. Clara blinked. What scandals? The wine delivery yesterday. Apparently you rejected 12 bottles and sent a scathing note about pretentious markup on mediocre vintages to our supplier. Those wines were overpriced garbage. I won't serve them to students. That supplier, Maximilian said through gritted teeth, is my golf partner. Then you need better taste in friends and wine. Clara stood, crossing her arms. What else? You told the kitchen staff they could take proper lunch breaks instead of eating standing up in the prep area. Basic human decency. Next. Maximilian's jaw worked furiously. You rejected the standardized hospitality textbooks and ordered French imports that cost 3 times as much. Because they're 3 times as good? Clara moved around her desk, bringing her closer to him. Is there a point to this tantrum, or are you just here to complain about me doing my job well? Your job is to create a simple vocational program, not a luxury hospitality academy. My job, Clara said, her voice rising, is to give these kids real skills that will actually get them hired in decent establishments. I won't hand them certificates in mediocrity just because it's cheaper. They were standing toe-to-toe now, both breathing hard, the air between them crackling with electricity. Clara could see the pulse beating at Maximilian's throat, could smell his intoxicating cologne mixed with something uniquely him. You're impossible, he said, his voice rough. You're insufferable, she shot back. For a moment, Clara thought he might kiss her. The way his eyes dropped to her mouth, the way he swayed slightly toward her. Then his phone rang, breaking the spell. Don't answer it, Clara found herself saying. Maximilian stared at her, something shifting in his expression. Then he deliberately reached into his jacket and turned off his phone. Better? His voice was softer now, almost intimate. Clara's breath caught. Mr. Ashworth, David Chen's panicked voice echoed from the outer office. Sir, there's been an incident. The spell shattered. Maximilian stepped back, his professional mask sliding into place with practiced ease. What kind of incident? David appeared in the doorway, wringing his hands. The wine samples for tomorrow's tasting session, they're gone. The delivery truck was robbed en route. And the backup supplier just called. They can't deliver replacement wines until next week. Clara felt her stomach drop. Tomorrow was her first official presentation to the foundation board, where she'd demonstrate the curriculum to 12 influential donors. Without wines for the tasting portion, the entire presentation would fall apart. How much wine do we need? Maximilian asked. 12 bottles, Clara said quietly. 6 whites, 6 reds. Nothing too expensive, just good representatives of major varietals. The board includes the Monteros, the Vasconcellos family, and Ambassador Chen, David added miserably. They're expecting a proper demonstration. Clara sank into her chair. Months of preparation, and it would all collapse because of a theft. I can try calling other suppliers, but on this short notice. They won't deliver to unknown accounts without credit checks and deposits, Maximilian finished, which takes weeks. Silence fell over the office. Clara stared at her hands, trying not to cry. This job wasn't just about money. It was about proving she belonged here, that she was more than just the woman who'd thrown wine at the boss's son. I'll handle it. Clara looked up sharply. Maximilian was typing rapidly on his phone. You'll what? I said I'll handle it. He didn't look at her, his fingers flying over the screen. My personal wine collection has everything you need. I'll have selections sent down this afternoon. Clara's mouth fell open. You're helping me? I'm helping the foundation, he corrected curtly. This presentation affects our reputation. But there was something in his voice, a gentleness that hadn't been there before. David looked between them with barely concealed amazement. Sir, that's very generous, but won't your collection be too what? Maximilian's tone could have cut glass. Too expensive for an educational demonstration? A ghost of a smile crossed Maximilian's lips. Miss Delacroix seems to believe expensive doesn't always mean pretentious. We'll see if she's right. Clara felt heat flood her cheeks. He'd been listening, really listening. "Thank you," she said quietly. Their eyes met across the office, and Clara felt something shift between them. Not the crackling antagonism of their previous encounters, but something warmer, more dangerous. "Don't thank me yet," Maximilian said. "My standards are higher than any supplier's." 2 hours later, a parade of delivery men brought 12 bottles to Clara's office, each wrapped in tissue paper like precious artifacts. Clara unwrapped them with growing amazement. A 2019 Sancerre from Henri Bourgeois. A 2018 Barolo from Giuseppe Rinaldi. A 2020 Riesling from Egon Müller. These weren't just good wines, they were exceptional bottles, each one perfectly chosen to represent its varietal at its finest. "Holy saints," whispered Maria, one of the foundation coordinators who'd come to help set up. "This is like Christmas and my birthday combined." Clara picked up the final bottle and nearly dropped it. Chateau d'Yquem, 2001, not as old as the bottle she'd poured over Maximilian's head, but still worth thousands. Was this his idea of a joke, a reminder of their first encounter? Her office phone rang. "Clara, it's Maximilian." The sound of her first name and his deep voice made her shiver. "The wines are beautiful, but the Chateau d'Yquem seems excessive, pretentious?" His tone was dry. "Or perhaps you think I'm setting you up to fail." "Are you?" A pause. "Ask me tomorrow after your presentation." The line went dead, leaving Clara staring at the phone and wondering if she'd just been helped or expertly manipulated. That evening, Clara stayed late in the office, preparing her notes and practicing her presentation. Napoleon dozed in his carrier while she rehearsed wine descriptions and tasting techniques. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the figure in the doorway until a soft cough made her look up. Maximilian stood there with his jacket slung over one shoulder, his tie completely gone, looking rumpled and human for the first time since she'd known him. "Working late?" His voice was gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Preparing. Tomorrow's important." He stepped into the office, and Clara noticed he was carrying a small bag. "I brought something." "More wine?" "Dinner." He held up the bag. "Thai food from that place on Rua Augusta. I figured you'd forgotten to eat." Clara stared at him. "You brought me dinner?" "I brought myself dinner. There's enough for two, and it seemed—" He shrugged, suddenly looking almost vulnerable. "Wasteful to eat alone." They shared pad thai and green curry sitting on her office floor, Napoleon watching them with regal disapproval from his perch. It was surreal. Maximilian Ashworth, billionaire CEO, eating takeout on her office carpet while she explained the difference between Old World and New World wine styles. "You really love this," he observed, watching her face as she talked. "Wine? Teaching, creating something meaningful." His eyes were thoughtful. "I'd forgotten what that looked like." "What do you mean?" Maximilian was quiet for a long moment. "I used to love building things, creating companies, solving problems. Somewhere along the way it became about winning instead of building." Clara felt something soften in her chest. It's not too late to remember. Their eyes met in the dim office light, and Clara felt the air shift between them again. This time, when Maximilian reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, she didn't pull away. "Clara," he said quietly. "Yes? Don't screw up tomorrow." She laughed, breaking the spell but somehow not destroying it. Such inspiring words of encouragement. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "You won't. You're too stubborn to fail." As he left her office that night, Clara touched her cheek where his fingers had brushed her skin and wondered if she was falling for the last man on earth she should want. Tomorrow's presentation would change everything. She just wasn't sure if that was a promise or a threat. The Foundation's conference room had been transformed into an elegant tasting salon. 12 place settings gleamed under crystal chandeliers, each station equipped with proper Riedel glasses and Clara's carefully prepared notes. Napoleon supervised from his carrier in the corner, occasionally offering a disapproving meow about the preparations. Clara checked her watch. 2:58 p.m. The board would arrive any moment for what could make or break her entire career. "Everything looks perfect," David assured her, though his nervous energy suggested otherwise. "The wines are breathing, the presentation materials are ready, and Margaret sends her apologies. She's stuck in traffic, but should be here shortly." Clara nodded, smoothing her emerald dress, the same vintage one she'd worn to meet Margaret, which now felt like armor. She'd spent the morning practicing her presentation until every word flowed like poetry, every wine fact nestled perfectly in her memory. What she hadn't prepared for was Maximilian walking through the conference room doors at exactly 3 p.m. He looked devastating in a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, but it was the way his eyes found hers immediately that made her breath catch. There was something different in his expression today, an intensity that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the memory of last night's dinner on her office floor. "Mr. Ashworth," she managed, her voice professionally cool despite her racing pulse. "I wasn't expecting you to attend." "I supervise all foundation presentations," he replied, but his eyes never left her face. "Besides, I'm curious to see what you'll do with my wines." The emphasis on "my" sent heat spiraling through Clara's chest. Before she could respond, the board members began filing in. 12 of São Paulo's most influential philanthropists and business leaders. Clara recognized several faces from society magazines. Helena Montero, steel heiress, Ambassador Chen, whose diplomatic parties were legendary, Dr. Vasconcelos, who owned half the city's hospitals. "Ladies and gentlemen," David announced, "please welcome Clara Delacroix, our new Director of Culinary Education." Clara stepped forward with the confidence of someone who'd spent years commanding respect in Michelin-starred restaurants. "Thank you all for being here. Today we're going to explore how wine education can transform lives." She began with the basics, terroir, varietals, the history of winemaking, but made each concept come alive with stories and sensory descriptions that had her audience leaning forward with interest. When she opened the first bottle, a crisp Sauvignon Blanc from Loire Valley, the room filled with the kind of reverent attention usually reserved for opera performances. "Notice the minerality," Clara instructed as they tasted. "That comes from the limestone soils where these grapes grew. When our students understand this connection between place and flavor, they're not just serving wine, they're telling stories." Ambassador Chen nodded approvingly. "Storytelling is essential in hospitality." Clara moved through the whites with growing confidence. The Sancerre with its elegant precision, a Burgundian Chardonnay that prompted actual sighs of pleasure from Helena Montero. Each wine was perfectly chosen, she realized, not just for quality, but for how it demonstrated key teaching points. Maximilian had understood her curriculum better than she dared hope. When she reached the reds, Clara found herself stealing glances at him. He sat at the far end of the table, ostensibly taking notes on his tablet, but she could feel his attention on her like a physical touch. Every time she looked his way, their eyes met with an intensity that made her stumble over words. "This Barolo," she said, pouring the Giuseppe Rinaldi, "represents everything beautiful about Italian winemaking. The Nebbiolo grape demands patience, respect, understanding of tradition." She was describing the wine's complexity when she noticed Dr. Vasconcelos frowning at his glass. "Is there a problem, doctor?" "The wine is exceptional," he said carefully. "But isn't this rather expensive for a vocational program?" A murmur went around the table. Clara felt her confidence waver. This was exactly what she'd feared, that the quality of Maximilian's collection would work against her. "The wines we're tasting today represent the pinnacle of their types," she began diplomatically, "but our actual curriculum will use wines exactly like these." Every head turned toward Maximilian, who had spoken quietly but with unmistakable authority. "Maximilian," Helena Montero ventured, "surely you don't mean to stock a student program with $1,000 bottles?" "I mean," Maximilian said, standing slowly, "that we're going to treat these students like they matter." Clara's heart stopped. He was defending her program, her philosophy, her belief that these kids deserve the best education possible. Most vocational programs teach students to serve cheap wine to cheap customers, Maximilian continued, walking to the front of the room. Miss Delacroix is teaching them to understand excellence, to recognize quality, to serve clients who appreciate the difference between good and extraordinary. He stopped beside Clara, close enough that she could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. These students aren't training to work in corner bars. They're training to work in establishments like Le Bernardin, where a sommelier's expertise can make or break a customer's experience. Ambassador Chen leaned back in his chair, studying them both. And you support this approach, Maximilian? Completely. Maximilian's voice was firm, but when he looked at Clara, something softer flickered in his eyes. Miss Delacroix has convinced me that there's no point in teaching mediocrity. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. He was risking his reputation with the board, defending her vision in front of people whose opinions could affect his business empire. Well then, Dr. Vasconcellos said with growing enthusiasm, let's see what other treasures you've brought us. The final wines were a revelation. A Côte du Rhône that sang with sun-soaked fruit, a Malbec from Mendoza that told stories of mountain vineyards, and finally the Chateau d'Yquem. Clara hesitated as she held the bottle. This dessert wine was worth more than some people's annual salaries. But as she looked around the table, she saw faces bright with curiosity and genuine engagement. This wine, she said, uncorking the Chateau d'Yquem with ceremonial precision, represents something beyond price. It's liquid poetry, created by centuries of tradition and touched by noble rot that transforms ordinary grapes into something magical. She poured small amounts into fresh glasses, the golden wine catching the light like captured sunshine. The first sip drew gasps of pleasure from around the table. My God, Helena whispered. It's like drinking concentrated joy. This, Clara said, watching their faces transform with wonder, is why we teach excellence. Because our students deserve to understand what they're serving. They deserve to create moments like this for others. The room fell silent, except for the soft sounds of appreciation as board members savored the extraordinary wine. Clara felt a profound sense of completion, as if every moment of her career had led to this. Miss Delacroix, Ambassador Chen said finally, I believe you've made your point beautifully. This program has my full support. A chorus of agreement rose around the table. Dr. Vasconcellos was already discussing funding increases. Helena Montero wanted to know about scholarship opportunities. Through it all, Clara was aware of Maximilian watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride? Admiration? Something deeper that made her pulse race? As the board members began to file out, still buzzing with enthusiasm about the program, Clara found herself alone with Maximilian in the conference room. Napoleon had finally emerged from his carrier and was investigating empty wine glasses with scientific interest. Thank you, Clara said quietly. What you did, defending the program like that. I was defending good business sense, Maximilian replied, but his eyes were warm. These donors respond to passion and excellence. You gave them both. Still, Clara stepped closer, drawn by something in his expression. You took a risk for me. For the foundation, he corrected, but his voice lacked conviction. They were standing close now, the empty conference room intimate around them. Clara could see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes, could count the seconds between his breaths. Clara, he said, her name rough on his lips. Yes? Instead of answering, Maximilian reached up to cup her face in his hands. His thumbs traced her cheekbones with reverent gentleness, and Clara's breath hitched. You were magnificent today, he whispered. So were you. This time, when he leaned down toward her, Clara didn't pull away. Their lips met in a kiss that tasted like wine and possibility, soft and sweet and full of promises neither of them was ready to make. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Clara saw something new in Maximilian's expression. Vulnerability, wonder, maybe even the beginning of love. This complicates things, he said. Clara smiled, feeling giddy with success and wine, and the memory of his lips on hers. I'm beginning to think complicated might be exactly what we need. From his perch on the conference table, Napoleon meowed approvingly. Even the cat knew they were perfect for each other. Clara woke up the next morning with wine-stained lips and a heart full of dangerous hope. She touched her mouth, remembering the gentle pressure of Maximilian's kiss, the way his eyes had softened when he looked at her after the board meeting. "Good morning, Napoleon," she murmured to the Persian cat stretched across her pillow. Did I dream it? Or did I actually kiss the most impossible man in Sao Paulo? Napoleon's judgmental stare suggested she had indeed lost her mind. Clara's phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Darling, heard the presentation was a triumph. Lunch today? I'm dying to hear everything." Before Clara could respond, another message appeared, this one from an unknown number. "Good morning. Thank you for yesterday. M." Her heart did a little flip. Maximilian Ashworth was texting her. Like a normal person. Like someone who'd kissed her in an empty conference room and meant it. Clara was still grinning at her phone when it rang. "Clara!" The voice was bright, familiar, and utterly unwelcome. "Darling, I just heard the most fascinating news." Clara's blood ran cold. "Sebastian, the one and only. I'm back in Sao Paulo, and imagine my surprise when I heard you were working for the Ashworth Foundation. My little Clara moving up in the world. Sebastian Beaumont, her ex-fiancé. The charming French sommelier who'd swept her off her feet in Bordeaux, convinced her to give up her position at Chateau Margaux, and then disappeared with their restaurant's investment money and his secretary 3 days before their wedding. What do you want, Sebastian? To see you, of course. It's been 2 years, chérie. Surely we can be civilized. I'm at the Copacabana Palace. Why don't you join me for lunch? I'd rather drink paint thinner. His laugh was as smooth and false as she remembered. Still so dramatic. Listen, Clara, I have a business proposition. Something that could benefit us both. I'm hanging up now. Wait. It's about the Ashworth account. I know something you need to hear. Against her better judgment, Clara hesitated. What about Maximilian? Meet me and I'll tell you everything. 1 o'clock at the hotel bar, for old time's sake. The line went dead, leaving Clara staring at her phone with growing dread. Sebastian never did anything without an agenda, and his sudden appearance the day after her triumph couldn't be coincidence. But what could he possibly know about Maximilian? At the foundation office that morning, Clara threw herself into work with manic intensity, trying to ignore the way her pulse jumped every time the elevator dinged. She was reviewing student applications when David knocked on her door. "Clara, there's someone here to see you." Her heart leaped, hoping it was Maximilian, but the man who entered her office was pure poison wrapped in expensive tailoring. Sebastian Beaumont looked exactly as she remembered, golden hair, green eyes, the kind of classical handsomeness that belonged on romance novel covers. He'd aged well, damn him, with just enough silver at his temples to suggest sophistication. "Bonjour, mon cœur," he said, that velvet French accent designed to melt hearts. "You look magnifique. You look like a man who owes me 50,000 rees and an apology." Clara didn't stand, didn't smile, didn't give him the satisfaction of any reaction beyond icy politeness. Sebastian laughed, settling into the chair across from her desk as if he'd been invited. "Still holding grudges? That's not very zen of you, chérie. What do you want?" "Straight to business. I like that." Sebastian leaned back, studying her office with calculating eyes. "I've been following your career, you know. Very impressive, this position with the Ashworth Foundation. Following my career or stalking me? Don't be dramatic. The sommelier community is small, word gets around, especially when someone makes such a splash at Le Bernardin." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. Of course he'd heard about the wine incident. The story had probably traveled through every restaurant in South America by now. "If you came here to gloat, I came to warn you." Sebastian's expression turned serious, and for a moment, Clara glimpsed the man she'd once thought she loved. "Maximilian Ashworth isn't who you think he is. And you would know this how? Because I've been doing business with him for months. His company is one of my biggest clients." Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. Clients for what? Wine consulting, import recommendations. I've been advising Ashworth Industries on their corporate entertainment purchases. Sebastian's smile was sharp. Including the wines for foundation events. The world tilted sideways. That's impossible. Maximilian chose those wines personally from his collection. Did he tell you that? Sebastian's laugh was cruel. Sherry, those wines came from my warehouse. I selected every bottle according to his specifications. Impress the board, make the sommelier look good, keep the costs reasonable despite appearances. Clara's hands clenched into fists. You're lying. The Chateau de Chem alone cost the foundation 12,000 rays, hardly a personal gift from his cellar. Sebastian reached into his jacket and produced an invoice. See for yourself. Clara stared at the paper, her heart sinking. Ashworth Industries, Beaumont Wine Consulting. A detailed list of the exact bottles she'd served yesterday, along with prices that made her stomach turn. Why are you showing me this? Because I thought you deserved to know the truth before you made a fool of yourself. Sebastian's voice softened with fake concern. The great Maximilian Ashworth played you, ma chérie. Made you think he was some romantic hero when really he was just protecting his investment. His investment? The foundation's reputation reflects on his company. Of course he wanted your presentation to succeed. His mother's pet project failing would be embarrassing. Sebastian shrugged. He used my expertise to make sure you'd shine, then let you believe it was some grand romantic gesture. Clara felt sick. The kiss, the gentle way he'd defended her program, the softness in his eyes. Had it all been calculated? A way to ensure her loyalty and the foundation's success? Even if that's true, she said quietly, it doesn't change anything between us. Doesn't it? Sebastian leaned forward, his voice dropping to that intimate tone that had once made her weak. I made mistakes, Clara. I know that. But I never lied to you about who I was. I never pretended to be something I wasn't to manipulate your feelings. Before Clara could respond, her office door opened without ceremony. Maximilian stood in the doorway, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. His eyes moved from Clara's stricken face to Sebastian's smug expression, and his jaw went rigid. Am I interrupting something? Sebastian rose gracefully, extending a hand. You must be Maximilian Ashworth. Sebastian Beaumont, we've spoken on the phone. Maximilian ignored the offered hand, his gaze fixed on Clara. Is everything all right? Clara looked between them. Sebastian with his satisfied smile. Maximilian with growing confusion and something that might have been hurt in his eyes. The invoice crumpled in her trembling hands. Actually, she heard herself say, Mr. Beaumont was just explaining your business relationship. Something flickered across Maximilian's face. Understanding. And then, devastatingly, resignation. Clara, I can explain. Can you? Her voice was remarkably steady considering her heart was breaking. Because apparently you didn't choose those wines from your personal collection. You bought them. Through him. Maximilian's shoulders straightened, his expression closing off. Yes. That single word hit Clara like a physical blow. No explanation, no defense, just confirmation of her worst fears. I see. She stood, holding on to her dignity by sheer force of will. Well, thank you both for being so educational. Clara, Maximilian stepped toward her. Don't. She held up a hand, surprised by how steady it was. I think we've said enough for one day. Sebastian's smile was triumphant. Perhaps we could continue our lunch conversation, Sherry. Get out. Clara's voice cut like glass. Both of you. Now. Sebastian shrugged, apparently satisfied with the destruction he'd wrought. A bientôt, Clara. When you're ready to hear about my proposition. He sauntered out, leaving Clara and Maximilian alone in the wreckage of whatever they'd been building. You don't understand, Maximilian said quietly. I understand perfectly. Clara's voice was hollow. You needed your mother's project to succeed, so you orchestrated the whole thing. The wines, the defense at the board meeting even. She touched her lips. Even last night. That kiss had nothing to do with business. Didn't it? Clara laughed, the sound bitter. How convenient that it happened right after I'd proven useful to you. Maximilian's face went white. You think I would manipulate you like that? I think you're a businessman who protects his investments. Clara turned away, unable to look at him. And I think I was an idiot to believe otherwise. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Clara heard Maximilian's footsteps moving toward the door. For what it's worth, he said quietly, you're wrong about everything except the wines. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with Napoleon and the shattered pieces of a dream she'd barely allowed herself to have. Outside her window, São Paulo sprawled in all its chaotic glory, indifferent to one woman's broken heart. But inside her office, Clara Delacroix was learning that some wines, no matter how perfectly chosen, left the bitterest aftertaste of all. 3 days of radio silence from Maximilian had Clara convinced she'd made the right decision. Men like him were all about control and manipulation. She'd learned that lesson with Sebastian, and she wouldn't repeat it. At least that's what she told herself while obsessively checking her phone every 5 minutes. You're being ridiculous, she informed Napoleon, who was pointedly ignoring her from his perch by the window. He manipulated the whole situation, the wines, the presentation, probably even that speech about treating the students like they matter. Napoleon's tail twitched dismissively, as if to say humans are idiots. Clara was drowning her sorrows in student applications when her office door opened. She looked up, expecting David or Maria, but Sebastian stood there with 2 coffee cups and that insufferable smile. Bonjour, ma belle. I brought cafezinho. Thought we should finish our conversation properly. We have nothing to discuss. Clara didn't look up from her papers. Actually, we do. Sebastian set 1 cup on her desk and settled into the chair across from her. My proposition, remember? Not interested. You haven't heard it yet. Sebastian's voice turned serious, losing its usual playful tone. I'm opening a restaurant, Clara, here in São Paulo, high-end Michelin star potential, with a wine program that will revolutionize the city's dining scene. Despite herself, Clara felt a flicker of interest. And I want you as my head sommelier. Full partnership, creative control over the wine list, your name on the door. Sebastian leaned forward. Beaumont and Delacroix. We'd be unstoppable. Clara's laugh was bitter. Like we were in France before you stole our investors' money and ran off with your secretary. Amélie and I, that was complicated. And the money situation was a misunderstanding that cost me my job and my reputation. Which is why I'm offering you this chance to rebuild both. Sebastian's green eyes were earnest, almost convincing. Clara, you're wasting your talent here. Teaching spoiled rich kids about wine pairings? You belong in a real kitchen, creating real experiences for people who understand what you're capable of. The foundation students aren't spoiled rich kids. They're underprivileged youth getting their first real opportunity. At a program funded by a man who played you like a violin. Sebastian's voice hardened. Face it, Cherie. Maximilian Ashworth used you to make his mother's pet project successful. The moment it stops serving his purposes, you'll be discarded. Clara's chest tightened. She'd been thinking the same thing for 3 days, but hearing it said aloud made it feel more real, more painful. My restaurant will be different, Sebastian continued. No corporate manipulation, no hidden agendas, just you, me, and the best wine program South America has ever seen. And what about Amélie? Is she part of this partnership too? Sebastian waved a hand dismissively. Ancient history. She's back in France, married to some boring banker. This is about us, Clara. About the future we could build together. Before Clara could respond, her phone rang. Margaret's name flashed on the screen. Excuse me, she told Sebastian, answering the call. Margaret? Darling, I need to see you immediately. My office now. And Clara? Margaret's voice was unusually sharp. Don't speak to anyone else until we've talked. The line went dead, leaving Clara staring at her phone with growing unease. Trouble in paradise? Sebastian asked with false sympathy. I have to go. Think about my offer, Clara. But don't take too long. Opportunity doesn't wait forever. Clara left Sebastian in her office and took the elevator to Margaret's floor with a sense of impending doom. She found Maximilian's mother pacing behind her desk like a caged lioness, her usually perfect composure cracked. "Sit," Margaret commanded without preamble. "We need to talk." Clara perched on the edge of a leather chair, her stomach nodding. "If this is about what happened with your son, it's about Sebastian Beaumont." Margaret's voice was ice cold. "Tell me everything about your relationship with that man." Clara blinked. "How do you—" "Answer the question, dear. It's important." Reluctantly, Clara explained. The romance in France, the stolen money, the disappeared fiancé, the professional disaster that had followed. Margaret's expression grew grimmer with each detail. "I thought so," Margaret said finally. "Clara, that man is dangerous. More dangerous than you know." "What do you mean?" Margaret pulled out a thick file folder. "I had him investigated after security told me he'd been asking questions about you around the building. What I found—" She shook her head. "Amélie wasn't his secretary, Clara. She was his accomplice." Clara's blood went cold. "Accomplice?" "They've been running the same con across Europe for years. Target talented female sommeliers, romance them, use their expertise and connections to set up fraudulent restaurant ventures, then disappear with the money." Margaret opened the file, revealing photos, documents, bank records. "You weren't his first victim, and you won't be his last if we don't stop him." Clara stared at the evidence, her hands trembling. Restaurant projects in Lyon, Barcelona, Milan, all following the same pattern. Charming French sommelier meets talented local expert, promises partnership, vanishes with investor funds. "The restaurant he's proposing?" Margaret continued relentlessly. "He's already got 3 investors lined up based on your reputation. He plans to use your name and credentials to raise capital, then disappear again. But the money in France was never a misunderstanding. It was theft, pure and simple. He's wanted by Interpol, though he's very good at staying one step ahead of the law." Clara felt sick. Sebastian hadn't come back for her. He'd come back to use her. Again. "Why are you telling me this?" she managed. Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Because despite what you think, my son cares about you. Very much. And because I won't let that snake hurt you again. Your son manipulated me just as much as Sebastian did." "Did he?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Let me ask you something, dear. When Maximilian ordered those wines, did you think he personally selected each bottle? He said they were from his collection. He said he'd handle it. You assumed the rest." Margaret's smile was knowing. "My son owns one of the world's finest wine collections, but it's stored in climate-controlled warehouses in Napa Valley and Bordeaux. He couldn't access it on short notice, so he did the next best thing. He hired the most expensive consultant in the city to choose wines that would make you shine." Clara's world tilted. But Sebastian said whatever would hurt you most and drive a wedge between you and Maximilian. Think, Clara. If my son was really manipulating you, would he have risked his reputation defending your program in front of the board? Would he have stayed late bringing you dinner? Would he have kissed you like a man falling in love? Tears pricked Clara's eyes. She'd been so ready to believe the worst, so quick to protect herself from potential heartbreak, that she'd thrown away something real. "I've been such an idiot. You've been hurt before. It makes us cautious." Margaret's voice was gentle now. "But Clara, some things are worth the risk." Clara's phone buzzed. A text from Sebastian. "Thinking of you, chérie. Have you considered my offer? Time is running out." She showed Margaret the message, whose expression turned predatory. "Perfect. Here's what we're going to do." An hour later, Clara stood in the Foundation's test kitchen, which had been transformed into an elegant tasting room. Candles flickered on the central island, and a selection of truly exceptional wines waited to be opened. At Margaret's insistence, she'd changed into her emerald dress, armor for what was about to happen. Sebastian arrived exactly on time, looking smugly confident in his perfectly tailored suit. Clara Mabel, you look ravishing. I knew you'd see reason. Hello, Sebastian. Sebastian spun around as Maximilian emerged from the shadows by the wine storage. He looked devastating in a midnight blue suit, his eyes cold as winter steel. Maximilian. Sebastian recovered smoothly. How nice to see you again. Wish I could say the same. Maximilian moved to stand beside Clara, close enough that she could feel his warmth. We need to discuss your business practices. I'm not sure what you mean. Interpol seems very interested in your various restaurant ventures. Margaret appeared in the doorway, flanked by two serious-looking men in dark suits. Gentlemen, meet Sebastian Beaumont. Sebastian's face went white, then flushed with rage. You can't prove anything. Actually, we can. Maximilian pulled out his phone, and Clara realized he'd been recording. You just confessed to manipulating Clara's feelings to use her professional reputation for fraud. That's conspiracy to commit theft at minimum. Clara! Sebastian turned to her desperately. You can't let them do this. We had something real. We had lies, Clara said quietly. All of it. The love, the partnership, the future you promised. It was all just another con. As the investigators led Sebastian away, he turned back one last time. This isn't over, Sherry. I'll be back. No, Maximilian said softly. You won't. After the chaos settled, Clara found herself alone in the kitchen with Maximilian. The candles still flickered between them, but the romantic atmosphere felt fragile, uncertain. Thank you, she said finally, for protecting me. She gestured helplessly. For everything. I should have explained about the wines from the beginning. Maximilian's voice was rough. I wanted you to succeed, but I didn't want you to think I was trying to buy your gratitude. So you let me think you'd chosen them personally. I hoped you'd never have to know, that it would just be a perfect moment. Clara felt tears threaten again. You were trying to create magic. I was trying not to fall in love with you. Maximilian stepped closer, his eyes vulnerable. I failed spectacularly. Clara's breath caught. Maximilian. I know I have no right to ask this after everything that's happened, but... He reached for her hands, his touch gentle. Could we start over? Forget the wine, forget Sebastian, forget everything except this moment? Clara looked into his eyes and saw truth there. Not manipulation or calculation, but something raw and real and terrifying. What are you asking? I'm asking if you'd like to have dinner with me. Real dinner where I don't check my phone and you don't bring your cat. Where we talk about wine and dreams and whatever else people who are falling ridiculously in love talk about. Clara's smile felt like sunrise. Napoleon would be very offended by that exclusion. Napoleon can come to the second date. So presumptuous, assuming there'll be a second date. I'm hoping for at least 50. Maximilian's thumb traced her knuckles. Clara, She silenced him with a kiss, standing on her toes to reach his lips, pouring 3 days of confusion and hurt and desperate hope into the connection between them. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Clara rested her forehead against his. Yes to dinner, she whispered. Yes to trying again. Yes to whatever this is between us. Even if it's complicated? Clara laughed, the sound bright with possibility. Especially if it's complicated. The best wines always are. 6 months later, the Delacroix Culinary Academy was a symphony of controlled chaos. In the gleaming test kitchen, 20 students from the Foundation's first graduating class moved with precision born of months of training, preparing a 7-course dinner for São Paulo's most influential food critics and philanthropists. Clara watched from the observation deck, her heart swelling with pride. Maria Santos, who'd started the program barely able to distinguish Chardonnay from Chablis, was now explaining the mineral complexity of a Sancerre to a Michelin-starred chef. Eduardo Ribeiro, former street kid turned sommelier extraordinaire, was decanting a 2015 Barolo with the reverence of a priest handling holy wine. Nervous? Maximilian's arm slipped around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Terrified, Clara admitted, leaning into his warmth. 6 months of work comes down to the next 3 hours. They're ready. His voice was confident, but Clara could feel the tension in his muscles. The success of tonight's graduation showcase would determine the Academy's future funding, and they both knew it. Easy for you to say. You're not the one whose reputation depends on whether 20-year-old Eduardo can properly explain the difference between Premier Cru and Grand Cru Burgundy to Ambassador Chen. Maximilian turned her in his arms, his blue eyes warm with affection and something deeper. Clara, look at them. Really look. She followed his gaze to the kitchen below, where her students moved with quiet confidence. They wore crisp white uniforms with Delacroix Academy embroidered in elegant script, a far cry from the uncertain teenagers who'd walked through her doors 6 months ago. You didn't just teach them about wine, Maximilian continued softly. You taught them to believe in themselves, to understand that they deserve to serve excellence, to be part of something beautiful. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. When did you become so wise? I had an excellent teacher. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Someone who showed me that the best things in life are worth fighting for. Before Clara could respond, David Chen appeared at her elbow, looking characteristically frazzled. Clara, we have a situation. The critic from Veja just arrived and she's asking specifically about the wine pairings. And Napoleon has somehow gotten into the dining room and is holding court at table 3. Clara groaned. Her Persian cat had developed an unfortunate habit of charming dinner guests, though she had to admit his presence often improved the evening's atmosphere. I'll handle the critic, she said. Max, can you retrieve our furry host? Already on it. Maximilian kissed her temple. Break a leg, beautiful. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of controlled pandemonium. Clara moved between the kitchen and dining room like a conductor orchestrating 2 symphonies simultaneously. She guided students through wine service with subtle hand signals, answered critics' probing questions about her teaching methods, and somehow managed to keep Napoleon from sampling the cheese course. But it was during the main course, herb-crusted lamb with a 2016 Chateauneuf-du-Pape pairing, that the magic really happened. Elena Montero, the steel heiress known for her impossibly refined palate, summoned Maria to her table. Clara held her breath as the young sommelier approached, hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. This wine, Elena said, holding up her glass, is extraordinary. Tell me about your choice. Maria straightened, her voice clear and confident. The 2016 Chateauneuf-du-Pape comes from the Domaine du Vieux Télégraphe, Madame Montero. The winemaker, Henri Brunier, works with vines that are over 60 years old, planted in the famous galets roulés, those smooth stones that retain heat and give the wine its distinctive minerality. Clara felt her heart skip. This wasn't rote memorization. Maria was telling a story, making connections. The herbs in our lamb preparation echo the garrigue herbs that grow wild around the vineyard, Maria continued, warming to her subject. Rosemary, thyme, lavender. They create a bridge between the landscape and the glass. When you taste them together, you're not just having dinner. You're experiencing Provence. Elena smiled, actually smiled, and raised her glass in salute. Beautifully explained, my dear. I feel as though I've traveled to southern France without leaving my chair. Clara had to excuse herself to the hallway to wipe away tears of pride. She was still composing herself when Maximilian found her. Napoleon draped regally across his arms. Everything all right? Perfect. Everything is absolutely perfect. Clara scratched behind Napoleon's ears. How did you extract him from the dining room? Diplomatic immunity. I promised him the good salmon tomorrow. Maximilian's expression grew serious. Clara, there's something I need to tell you. About the funding. Ladies and gentlemen, Margaret's voice carried from the dining room, interrupting him. If I could have your attention for a moment. They returned to find Margaret standing at the center of the room, radiant in midnight blue silk and pearls. The conversation had died to expectant silence. Tonight we've witnessed something extraordinary, Margaret began. Young people who were told they weren't good enough, smart enough, worthy enough, serving wine and telling stories that would make professionals weep with envy. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The Delacroix Culinary Academy represents everything I hoped it would be when we began this journey. But more than that, it represents hope, possibility, the radical idea that excellence should be available to everyone, not just the privileged few. Clara felt Maximilian's hand find hers, his fingers intertwining with a warmth that steadied her racing heart. Which is why, Margaret continued, the Ashworth Foundation is pleased to announce a 5-year commitment to expand the Academy program. We'll be offering full scholarships to 100 students annually, with placement assistance at São Paulo's finest restaurants. The room erupted in applause. Clara stared at Margaret in shock. They'd hoped for 1 year of additional funding, maybe 2. 5 years meant permanence, meant building something that would last. But that's not all. Margaret's eyes sparkled with mischief. We've also received a rather unique proposal for the Academy's future development. She gestured toward the back of the room, where Eduardo stood nervously beside a projection screen. Eduardo Ribeiro, one of our first students, has proposed establishing a student-run restaurant where advanced academy graduates can gain real-world experience while creating opportunities for the next generation. The Ashworth Foundation is delighted to fund this venture, with Eduardo as head sommelier and Clara as consulting director. Clara's mouth fell open. A restaurant run by her students, funded by the foundation. It was beyond her wildest dreams. And, Margaret added, her smile turning positively wicked, we thought the perfect location would be the renovated space at Rua Augusta 1247, formerly occupied by Le Bernardin. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew Clara's history. The place where her old life had ended would birth her new beginning. As the evening wound down and guests departed with effusive compliments, Clara found herself alone with Maximilian in the now quiet kitchen. Her students had gone home to celebrate. Napoleon was napping in his carrier and the dishes were cleaned and put away. I can't believe it, she said, sinking onto a stool. A restaurant, a real restaurant with my students. You deserve it. Maximilian perched on the stool beside her. All of it. The success, the recognition, the chance to build something lasting. We deserve it, Clara corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Without your mother, without the foundation's support. Clara. Maximilian slipped off his stool and, to her complete amazement, dropped to one knee. Max, what are you? Her words died as he pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. 6 months ago, you threw wine on my shirt and changed my entire world, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You showed me what passion looks like, what it means to fight for something that matters. You made me remember who I used to be before I forgot how to build instead of just acquiring. Clara's hands flew to her mouth, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. I love your stubbornness and your integrity and the way you make Napoleon judgmental faces when you think I'm not looking. I love how you turned a foundation program into a movement, how you see potential in broken things and make them beautiful. Tears streamed down Clara's face now, but she couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Clara Delacroix. Maximilian opened the box, revealing a vintage-style ring with a central diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light like captured stars. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life learning about wine and watching you change the world one student at a time? Yes, Clara whispered, then louder. Yes, yes. Absolutely yes. The ring slipped onto her finger like it had been waiting there her whole life. Maximilian surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed and cried simultaneously. When he set her down, they were both breathing hard, foreheads touching, lost in their own private universe. I love you, Clara said against his lips. Even when you're impossible and arrogant and make me want to throw more wine at you. I love you too. Especially when you want to throw wine at me. It keeps things interesting. From his carrier, Napoleon meowed approvingly, as if to say finally, these humans figured it out. 3 years later, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vigno and Destino restaurant, painting everything in golden light. Clara Ashworth, she still got a thrill from her married name, stood in the dining room surveying her kingdom. The restaurant was her dream, made manifest. Elegant without being pretentious, welcoming without being casual, with a wine program that had earned recognition from critics across South America. More importantly, it employed 15 academy graduates and had a waiting list of students eager to train in its kitchen. "Madame Clara," Eduardo called from behind the bar, where he was training the newest sommelier candidate. "The wine writer from Wine Spectator is here for the interview." "Already?" Clara checked her watch and laughed. 3 years of marriage hadn't cured Maximilian of his punctuality obsession, but it had taught her to keep better track of time. She found the writer in the private dining room, a distinguished woman in her 50s with keen eyes and an iPad full of questions about the restaurant's unique training program. "Tell me about your philosophy," the writer began. "How do you balance commercial success with educational mission?" Clara smiled, settling into her chair with the confidence of someone who'd found her calling. "We don't balance them, we integrate them. Our students aren't just learning wine service. They're learning that excellence isn't about price points or pretension. It's about understanding, about connection, about creating moments that matter." She paused to pour 2 glasses of their signature wine, a collaboration between academy students and a local vintner that had won 3 international awards. "Every bottle tells a story. Every service creates a memory. Our students learn to be storytellers, memory makers. They learn that hospitality is an art form." The interview continued for an hour, covering everything from their scholarship program to their plans for expansion. Clara had just finished explaining their partnership with local vintners when she heard familiar footsteps in the hallway. Maximilian appeared in the doorway, looking devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit, despite having spent the morning in board meetings. His eyes found hers immediately, that same spark of connection that had been there from their first real conversation. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said to the writer, "but I have something for my wife." Clara's eyebrows rose. "It's Tuesday afternoon. What's the occasion?" Instead of answering, Maximilian handed her an envelope bearing the logo of the International Sommelier Association. Clara's heart skipped. She'd applied for their prestigious Master Sommelier program months ago but hadn't heard back. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope and read the letter inside. Then read it again. "I passed," she whispered. Then louder, "I passed the preliminary examination. They're inviting me to the advanced program in Bordeaux." The wine writer looked confused, but Maximilian's face lit up with pride and joy that made Clara fall in love with him all over again. "Congratulations, Madame Master Sommelier," he said, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that tasted like triumph and possibility. "Almost Master Sommelier," Clara corrected, but she was beaming. "The full certification takes 2 years." "Then it's a good thing I love France," Maximilian murmured against her ear. "Think they need a business consultant in Bordeaux?" Later that evening, after the writer had left with promises of a glowing feature article, Clara and Maximilian sat in their apartment with Napoleon sprawled across both their laps like a furry chaperone. The lights of São Paulo twinkled outside their windows, but Clara's attention was entirely focused on the man beside her. "Are you serious about Bordeaux?" she asked, playing with his wedding ring. "I'm serious about you," he replied simply. "About us. About whatever comes next." Clara thought about the restaurant thriving downstairs, about the students who would keep learning and growing in her absence, about the adventure waiting in France's wine country. "Eduardo can manage the restaurant," she mused. "And Maria's ready to take over more of the training program. And my mother has been plotting to accidentally encounter French aristocracy for years. She'd probably follow us there." Clara laughed, imagining Margaret charming her way through Bordeaux society. "What about Ashworth Industries? Has excellent managers who've been wanting more autonomy. Besides," Maximilian's arms tightened around her, "I've been thinking about that conversation we had years ago, about remembering what it means to build instead of just acquire." "What are you thinking?" "Wine. Maybe it's time for Ashworth Industries to get into the wine business properly. Partner with small producers, help them expand to new markets, create something beautiful instead of just profitable." Clara twisted in his arms to study his face. You want to become a wine importer? I want to become whatever lets me support your dreams while building something meaningful of my own. His smile was soft, vulnerable in a way that still surprised her. Think you could teach an old businessman about terroir and tannins? You're not old, Clara protested, then grinned. But yes, I think I could manage that. Might take a lifetime, though. Lucky for me, I plan to spend a lifetime learning from you. They sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted like wine and laughter, and the perfect vintage of a love story that had aged beautifully despite its chaotic beginning. From his position across their laps, Napoleon purred his approval of the plan. After all, the best adventures always began with someone brave enough to make the first move, even if that first move involved throwing wine at the most impossible man in São Paulo. Some stories, Clara reflected as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, were worth waiting for. This one had been worth every drop. The end. Love, like the finest wine, improves with time, patience, and the occasional dramatic gesture. Napoleon the cat, as interpreted by his devoted humans,